The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership.
Who doesn't want to wake up in the morning, or if you go and work overnight, who doesn't want to show up to work and feel like they matter, that their opinions matter, their voice matters, that their work matters? It is simply better for our engagement and discretionary effort.
I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. If you've ever had the good fortune of meeting Stephen Shedletsky, or Shed as he's better known, you'll know that he is a very passionate guy. He has a passion to help leaders listen to and nurture the voices of others. He is passionate about helping leaders and teams foster environments where people feel heard. Shed is a facilitator, speaker, and coach on his own, but you may recognize him from his association with our friend Simon Sinek. In fact, Shed first learned about Simon from his first TED Talk, which is the same way Barry-Wehmiller CEO Bob Chapman first encountered Simon. Shed was the fourth person to join Simon's team in 2011. He started out answering Simon's fan mail, but quickly grew into a role scaling up Simon's social media content and presence, and he held the roles of Chief of Staff to the CEO and Head of Training and Product Development, leading a global team of world-class speakers and facilitators. But Shed has also shared hundreds of his own keynotes and workshops on purpose, leadership, and culture over the years. And this fall, Shed will release his first book, Speak Up Culture: When Leaders Truly Listen, People Step Up. You can find out more about the book and Shed at his website, shedinspires.com. I've known Shed for quite a while now, so it was a lot of fun to have him on our podcast, as you'll hear. We talk about his book, and he defines what he means by speak up culture, but we start our conversation off with Shed talking about his journey and how and why he became passionate about helping others feel heard.
Well, so I'll go as far back as childhood, which I know that's exactly where you wanted me to go, Brent. This is therapy with Brent. The thing that's of interest is I grew up with a stutter. And so I know what it feels like to potentially have something to say, but to remain silent because of fear and of voicelessness. So I've gone on to write this book called Speak Up Culture, and it's very much born from knowing what it feels like to be voiceless. And then a bunch of years later, I started my career after business school with a large corporation in sort of their accelerated management leadership development programmy thing. Leadership was in the title. So I was like, yeah. I just simply forgot to ask them how they defined the term leadership, because it turns out there's no standard definition. Maybe they would have said the right things, but if there was an honest assessment, it was more to do with profit loss, authority, and quite frankly, a vast majority of the leaders at the company were white, male, and old. And so on my first day at that job, 1,000 people were let go post-merger. That was my first day out of college at my first sort of real grown-up job. And so I saw the tumultuous impact of change, and quite frankly, leaders who, the vast majority of the leaders that I saw were unsure of their own future. And instead of leading the people around them, they were a little bit more in self-preservation mode of what it meant for them. There was one leader, my direct manager, that I saw who was amazing because he knew he was months out from retirement. So he did everything in his power to lead, to protect his people, to keep their jobs, to put them in positions to thrive. It was actually remarkable watching him sort of maneuver. I fell, quite frankly, into the depths of depression in this first job. Like, I lost myself. It was the first time in my life I made a choice and it didn't work out. And the first person I made wrong was me. Like, why am I not motivated? As opposed to perhaps, why is this situation, environment, context not for me? A friend who quickly became a mentor shared Simon Sinek's How Great Leaders Inspire Action TED Talk, the same one that Bob watched, which compelled Bob to reach out to Simon. And I felt like found my orator. Like I listened to Simon talk and share the why, and I'm like, yeah, like everything this guy says, I know to be true. And then right time, right place. I was let go from that first job for mentoring interns, a disproportionate number of which turned down full-time job opportunities, citing conversations with this guy, me, a rebel with a cause, perhaps. Not a great employee over here, and and yeah, I went to hear Malcolm Gladwell give a talk, and Simon spoke just before him, Simon Sinek. And sort of the connection I felt with Simon over a screen was amplified threefold by seeing him share in person and just sort of feeling that palpable passion that he's so great at sharing with. Right time, right place. Ended up becoming fourth person to join Simon's team. Have had an amazing career working with Simon's team for over 10 years. And then being on the speaking tour, sharing Simon's ideas, I often got the question, hey, Shed, when are you going to write your own book? And my answer was always the same, if and when I ever come across something worth writing about, because we've all seen or read or started reading books by, quote, keynote speakers who write books because that's what keynote speakers do, which I'm pretty sure is the definition of a cruddy book. And so I never wanted to write one of those. And just a confluence of events and reflections had me come up with this idea of a speak up culture. That what are the conditions that leaders can create inside of their organizations where people feel that it's both safe and worth it to speak up, to share ideas, concerns, disagreements, and mistakes, believing all of that will lead to improvement and not being ignored, and especially not being punished, because speaking up in our organizations is hard to do. It takes risk. It is never without fear. So that's a bit of a longer version of sort of what got me here, but yeah, that's what got me to writing this book.
When you saw that first video of Simon's, what was it inside of you, or what was it that just kind of made you light up when you heard what he had to say?
Great question. So I think a couple of things. One, I had an experience that I think a lot of people have had when they've heard him speak, and especially that first talk with the golden circle, is he takes these very abstract, amorphous, hard to understand ideas like purpose and values and codifies it into an easy to understand, easy to repeat, and easy to enact formula. So that's one piece, is I kind of did that puppy dog like, everything this guy says to be true. And I've kind of already felt and thought that, but he puts it into words that I can grasp and do something with and share it with others. The other is the complement between Simon's purpose, Simon's why, which is to inspire people to do what inspires them, so that together we can change our world for the better. And the change that he is inspired to create is a more inspired, safe, and fulfilled world. I didn't know it at the time of watching it, but some years later, and once I got to working with his team, I articulated my own why, which is to engage with people in meaningful ways so that we connect with depth and live in a more fulfilled world. And so I found an orator. I found someone who was far further along in the journey of contributing to and creating the type of world of work and beyond that I wanted to live, practice, contribute, amplify within. So I think it was both the messenger and the message.
Did you know before you saw him what your why would become?
Yeah, I think, Brent, it was inside of me, but not yet articulated. And him speaking and sharing his vision and sharing stories and content resonated with me because of my values and beliefs. I didn't draw it up that like, oh, I'm going to go work with this guy for 10, 12 plus years. It was a confluence of events that just kind of happened. But yeah, I mean, it's similar to people who feel drawn toward a Steve Jobs or a Malala or a Martin Luther King Jr., these amazing orators who put into clear words. Oftentimes we don't have the articulation and someone gives it to us and we go, yeah, that. So that was my experience.
We talked a little bit about your corporate experience. When you think about a speak up culture for you personally, What did that feel like?
I think there were certain people in which I felt that it was safe and worth it to speak up. So one from a content point of view, and a context point of view, um, the two sort of axes of a speak up culture are safety and impact, right? Is it safe? Is it psychologically safe? And is it worth it? So sometimes it can feel safe, but it's not really worth it. This is where, because of a change in system or bureaucracy, or simply a too hard of a change in habit, like, you might speak up, but you don't think it's going to lead to any meaningful change. Like, you can tell your best friend you should probably stop eating chocolate cake every night, and they'll go, yeah, 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 yeah. You just don't think it'll lead to any meaningful impact. You obviously don't want that lower left sort of quadrant of low safety, low impact. That is an unhappy marriage of fear and apathy. And I've been there in my career. I've seen others there. It's no fun. And, it's not, it is near nor safe nor worth it to even speak up, right? Fear and apathy. And then what's really interesting is low safety, but high impact, where you don't necessarily feel safe, but you're so deeply connected to stakes that seem worth it, whether it's around employee health and well-being, whether it's around racial justice, or whether it's around health and safety. So for example, Ed Pearson, the senior engineer at Boeing, who's a retired naval officer, and he was on the production line of the 737 MAX, saw all the warning signs that this was not safe practice, and he didn't believe that they were putting a safe plane in the sky. And to his own risk, to his own reputation, relationships, job, he spoke up. And he spoke up to the right people to stop that line, to which he even said, because he was a retired naval officer, he said, I've seen operations in the military shut down for less. To which the general manager of the Renton, Washington facility, who had the power to literally stop that production line, which would have been the right thing to do, he said, Ed, this is not a military operation. This is a for-profit business. To which Ed was like, what? Like, come on. So all those decisions were made seemingly in the name of profit. So, my corporate experience before I joined Simon, I had a couple jobs with two big organizations. One was a consulting company, a big and well-known one. I didn't necessarily feel that it was safe and worth it to speak up everywhere. Nor do I necessarily think that's a reality. I hope it's the case, but not every leader is for every person. But there were pockets and certain leaders and certain people where I trusted and knew that it was safe and worth it to speak up. Sometimes we can get into these speak up silos where it just becomes venting and not necessarily healthy. So it might be safe, but it's not going to lead to any meaningful change. That's high safety, low on the impact. So yeah, my corporate experiences, there were certain relationships where it felt safe and worth it to speak up, but I wouldn't characterize ubiquitously those cultures as great speak up cultures.
Tell me what a speak up culture is.
Yeah, so a speak up culture is an environment in which people feel that it is safe and worth it to share their ideas, even if they're half-baked, concerns, even if they're personal or unpopular, disagreements, especially with senior leaders, and mistakes, believing it will lead to improvement and not punishment.
So what led you to this being the subject you decided to explore in your first book?
So two things. One is the experience of growing up with a stutter and knowing what it feels like to be voiceless, and lacking the confidence or physiology to actually speak up. And I went and got speech therapy and grew quite a bit. And ironically, speak now for a living, married a speech pathologist. Good choice. More so for my kids than me. And then the other is, I've had to date a 15-year plus career, and noticing the difference in culture, trust, productivity, cooperation, innovation, where there is a speak up culture and where there isn't, both in my own experiences as team member as well as coach or speaker or workshop facilitator. So just seeing the impact of healthy and unhealthy culture on results. And quite frankly, wanting to contribute toward a future where you, me, my children, the next generation, that there's more and more organizations and leaders that actually foster a speak up culture, because it's great for business. It's also very good for people's health and well-being. I open, and this is very much inspired by the work, a podcast that you did with the stat with, I think it's Dr. Casewood. Might be Choosewood. Thank you.
Yeah, Casey Choosewood.
Yeah. So yes, Casey Choosewood. Thank you. So Dr. Choosewood points out in the work with the National Institute of Health that, I open the book with this life and death building planes. And then I make the point that we know for a fact that our relationship with our direct boss, and even I just had this conversation with an entrepreneur, our relationships with our clients as well, I'm sure, have a direct impact on our health and well-being, more so than our relationship with our doctor, or relationship with our therapist, if we do indeed have a therapist. And it's at par, the impact of our boss on our health and well-being. The same is at par with the impact of our spouse or life partner. And so whether or not you work in a life and death line of business, leadership has a life-feeding or a life-depleting impact on employee well-being. And so that's why I'm very passionate. And I've had experiences in my career where I felt that, where my relationship with a leader actually made me better, helped me grow as a human being, made me healthier. And as well, I've had the contrary.
When talking about a speak up culture in an organization, could there be a time when that's not a good thing?
Sucking up is not the same as speaking up. So, I'm thinking in terms of when you need to make decisions, be nimble, and move quick. What many organizations went through at the beginning of the pandemic. That's a time where overall, I think you definitely want people to speak up, but it needs to be selective. I think there needs to be. I'm just trying to think this one out loud. So one is, sucking up is not the same as speaking up. So the two actions that leaders do to create a speak up culture is they encourage people for speaking up, and they reward people when it happens. So encourage means your voice matters. I want to hear it. Encourage could mean, hey, I'm not getting feedback, so I'm going to tell on myself. This is what I think I could be doing better. Am I on or am I off team? Encourage could also be, hey, on a scale of 0 to 10, how clear am I being in my presentation? And if you all say 10, I think you're lying. I want to improve. Encourage could be starting a project, saying, I've never led a perfect project, and this is going to be no exception. I need you all to contribute fully. Reward means once people do speak up, especially when they share something that's hard to hear, like bad news, an issue, a disagreement, a concern, do leaders get frustrated? Do they shut people down? Do they zip it, or do they encourage it and reward it? Do they say, thank you? Oh, that's hard to hear. It's going to slow us down, but I think you're onto something. So I think we need to be mindful of timing. But I'm really having a hard time thinking where speaking up is bad. I do think, though, that leaders have to be careful what they wish for, because if they say they want to speak up culture, then you have to be ready for what's going to come. Because especially this the younger generation of millennials, and especially Gen Zs, if you say, hey, we really want you to speak up about what you see, what you know, what you want, what matters, they might speak up about gender pay inequity, or what's our company policy on abortion rights, or hey, what are we doing for our Asian colleagues because there's increased Asian hate in our community. And if leaders go, oh, no, we just wanted your ideas so that we could make more profitable products, it's like, that's not a speak up culture, that's manipulation. So, and I'm even reflecting, Brent, because I have a small team. It's me and my head of operations, Ale. And when we have too much on our plate, we still make it a priority to check in. How are you doing? If one of us is short with the other, we still make time and space to debrief. And even if we don't have time for it, we make the time for it, because there's nothing more important than your people wanting to show up to work and contribute. The amount of time, energy, money, resources we waste from people showing up to work and not giving of their discretionary effort because they don't want to. And do we blame them? No. Like if you put people in a toxic environment, just like if you put a good cucumber in awful pickle brine, you're going to get an awful pickle, and it's not the cucumber, it's the brine. So yeah, I'm moving through. Is there ever a bad time for a speak up culture? And if it's high safety, high impact, and people are speaking up to help one another and the firm grow, I don't see any opportunity where it's bad.
You were talking about Gen Z a little while ago and being more willing to be those people that speak up. There are a lot of older leaders out there who are steering organizations who probably have a difficulty with it, with this kind of culture.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to them, and how could you help them adjust to that?
I mean, first and foremost, it is good for business. Teams that have a speak up culture are more trusting, are more innovative, and the results are there. I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but it's in the book and we can look it up. And it is just good for business. I don't know the stats off the top of my head because I just know this to be true. But there are stats that prove that organizations with high psychological safety, high trust, and a speak up culture are far more trusting, cooperative, and innovative. And what I would say to them is first and foremost, I'm not in the business of convincing. I'm in the business of inspiring and supporting. So I don't really want to have the semantic debate of whether this is a good idea or not. If you don't want to do it, all the power to you. Like I wish you well. But if you're open to the fact of, the people on my team might have good ideas, might have better perspectives, different perspectives, and will help us make better holistic decisions, let's go and let's figure it out and figure out ways that we can garner, encourage people to use their voice. And when they do, it's rewarded. So I would just say start small, and so two simple things that leaders can do to create more of a speak up culture. I'll take from Nelson Mandela. There are very few leaders that we can, debate are excellent leaders, but one I think we can all agree is a pretty good leader is Nelson Mandela. Like, find me the argument that says he wasn't an effective leader. Perfect human? Absolutely not. Never met one. Effective leader? I think we can agree on that. And so Mandela was asked how he learned to be a great leader, and he credits his father. His father was a community leader, a tribal chief, and he would follow his father and tag along to many of his community meetings. And his father did two things consistently. Whenever he could, he would insist that meetings be done in a circle. And the reason you sit in a circle is because there's no apex of a circle. When you sit at a long boardroom and there's one chair at the front, who's going to sit there, right? And so when you have a circle, it denotes equality, even though there is still a hierarchical dynamic because we are human beings. A circle denotes equality and everyone's voice matters. The other thing that Mandela's father would often do is, as best he could, he would share his opinion and speak last. He might help set up a conversation, but the number of times I've heard very senior leaders come into a room and say, "Hey, everyone, we have this issue or we have this opportunity. We need all hands on deck. I have some ideas, but I need yours. Here are my ideas." And it's like, no, like stop right before you share your ideas, because as soon as the most senior person in the room shares their ideas, you throw everyone into groupthink, and everyone goes, "Yeah, boss, sounds great." You need to suspend, and you can set up the context and say, "What have I missed?" Right? Who wants to add more? Have I summarized it effectively or not? And then zip it and use silence and go around the room, or use breakout rooms virtually or in person or hybrid. Do everything you can to get ideas, feedback, concerns, pushes, dissent, everything from your people, and just see how more robust the ideas are, the discussion is, the ownership and empowerment at the end. So those are two things that a more senior leader can do, is try to strip hierarchy, which use first names instead of titles, sit in a circle, and then speak last.
Tell me about the benefits of a speak up culture just for people.
Mm. Who doesn't want to wake up in the morning, or if you go and work overnight, who doesn't want to show up to work and feel like they matter, that their opinions matter, their voice matters, that their work matters? It is simply better for our engagement and discretionary effort. I think we live in this sort of interesting time where a lot of the zeitgeist is around, your identity is not your work, which is healthy. I like to describe, like, on the west coast of North America, Vancouver, Seattle, San Francisco, well, maybe not so much San Francisco, but certainly Seattle and Vancouver, people define themselves not by their work, but by their hobbies. I think that's a healthy thing, that we are more than our work. And with quiet quitting and the Great Resignation, it's sort of this overall revolt of, I think, the general population of employee feels as though, and I'm not just going to say the corporation, because this happens in not-for-profit as well, or in the for-impacted industry, where firms are the general feeling is that firms have taken advantage of that social contract of what it means to be an employee. And so there's this mass revolt of, the firm doesn't have my best interest at heart. Why should I give of my discretionary effort? Why should I go above and beyond if I'm not getting that respect, loyalty, and treatment on the input? Why should I give an output that is greater than? And by all means, there are people who want to do that, to rise up the ranks of an organization, and power to them. But I think, on the whole, there's a general shift toward, I will give when I am treated in a way that makes giving fair, worth it. And I think that's actually healthy. So yeah, I think that the discretionary effort of your people ought to be earned.
Mm. It's been a wild few years. And
has it?
Let me tell you about this thing we
where
had called
have you
the
been,
pandemic.
Prince? Yeah. Oh, right. That. Yes. It has been a definitely wild few years.
And one of the things which you talk about in your book that happened right before the pandemic was the Business Roundtable statement on the purpose of a corporation.
Yeah.
And funny enough that happened, I guess that was 2019, fall 2019, and then 2020 happened and everything changed. Talk a little bit about that statement, and if you feel like over the last few years, the companies that signed that statement have been living up to it, how the 3 years post that statement affected that statement, I guess.
So the statement you're referring to is the Business Roundtable, which I think is a collection of, at the time, 181 CEOs of Fortune whatever, insert 3 numbers, but like Fortune 100, 500 CEOs. Actually, can't all be 100 because there's 181 CEOs. Let's just call it Fortune 500. But Fortune CEOs sort of signing up to, on the whole, a sentiment that I very much agree with, that, quite frankly, since the late 70s through the 80s and 90s, with the dismantling of Glass-Steagall, that the responsibility of business has been twisted and backward, that it became popular through sort of the ideas proposed by Milton Friedman, adopted hugely by Jack Welch at GE. This is something that Bob and Simon Sinek talk about quite a bit, that the responsibility of business, it became popular, was to maximize profit and shareholder value while staying within the bounds of the law. What about ethical custom? It's a pretty low bar. And you had relative boom years economically through the 80s and 90s. So you didn't have to work so hard at making money because everyone was. Now, I don't believe the responsibility of business is that. I believe the responsibility of business, as Simon Sinek writes in The Infinite Game, is first and foremost to prioritize people and purpose. And third is to generate profit. I'm a capitalist. That's all good, but profit should be third on that list and to be used to be reinvested in our people and advancing our purpose. And that's essentially what this Business Roundtable announcement says, is that we've got the order of our stakeholders wrong, that it shouldn't be shareholders and profit first. You're allowed to have them on your stakeholders list, but it should be employees and community and planet and customers and all these things that we're like, yeah, of course. And business works at its best when, of course, an organization exists to serve some sort of end user, of course. But leaders who, quite honestly, are usually further removed from that end user, whether it's a customer, whatever it might be. Leaders must exist to serve their people. And when leaders exist to serve their people, you're more likely to have a healthier culture, and those people feel great supporting one another. And then that typically extends out to the end user, or the customer. That's the right order. That's capitalism, how it should work. It's more Adam Smith, invisible hand economics, and Milton Friedman, maximize profit and shareholder value economics, which doesn't work, right? The only thing that grows for growth's sake is cancer. Like it shouldn't. We shouldn't. The purpose of an organization isn't to grow. The purpose of an organization is to offer value to end users, and the organization is definitely allowed to endure a secondary benefit, but it shouldn't endure a primary benefit. So when you read this announcement from the Business Roundtable, you're like, yeah, rock on. Now the question is, did they legitimately transform, or was this simply a response to what society, customers, and employees want? And I think it's more of the latter, where, I think of Bob's story of going to a wedding, watching a father hand off his daughter to his daughter becoming a bride and being betrothed to another, and literally handing that person over, entrusting that they will care for their precious daughter. And Bob had a light bulb moment, and he was literally transformed from the inside out to go, oh my Lord, that's my responsibility of this as a CEO of an organization, that people's precious children are showing up to work here every day, and it's my responsibility as a steward to leave them better, right? To help them grow, to make sure that they're safe. Doesn't mean that they'll be with the organization forever, because business isn't a family, but it means that it's a community, a group of people who can agree to grow together and support one another. And so my cynicism towards that announcement, that though it reads well, I think it's more a response to what the outside world wants than a true inside-out transformation.
In thinking about your book and the process to write it, and now taking it on the road and talking to people, what's your one hope that would come out of the book?
I mean, my vision of what great leadership is, and what I think we need more of, is greater humility. And humility for me means that leaders are willing to look at themselves in the mirror and go, hot dang, I'm not perfect, and I can improve. And, I am the one thing in common with all of my failures. I think the mere fact that we have a term now called servant leadership means that our definition of the word leadership is broken. Because give me an example of leadership working where there isn't an intent to serve and to have a service orientation. So my hope is that leaders, whether they have a capital L next to their name, meaning they're in a formal role of leadership, or lowercase l leadership, where you may not have title, but you have influence and you wish to behave, to exhibit the behaviors of leadership, meaning you exhibit empathy and compassion, that you're decisive and yet you are accountable, meaning you own your results, especially when things don't go well, and you are very quick to give credit when things do go well, because everything that great that's ever accomplished is because of teams anyway. So I want, because this book exists out there, that there's more humble leaders, that we can, get rid of the word servant leadership and just call it good old leadership, and that we have more of a standard definition of what it means to lead, that we then select people that are more fit to lead, as opposed to people who want power. Anyone who has power, anyone who is hungry for power shouldn't be in a role of leadership. That's pretty scary and a bad recipe. So yeah, I hope leaders look in the mirror a little bit more and ask themselves, how can I get better? Not from a position of meekness, from a position of humility, because we can both be humble and confident at the same time. We cannot be both humble and arrogant at the same time.
Does your organization have a speak-up culture? One where people feel it is safe and worth it to share their ideas, concerns, disagreements, and mistakes? Are you a leader who listens? What are you doing to make sure all voices in your organization are heard? These things are vital to having a thriving organization. If you want to learn more about Shed and his book, go to shedinspires.com. And don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find more podcast articles and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.